Welcome to Football Ancestry. Before we jump into the various branches of Joe Gibbs' coaching tree, let's get to know more about Joe Gibbs himself. Gibbs got his start in the NFL in 1973 with the St. Louis Cardinals as running backs coach, a position that he held until 1977 when he was promoted to offensive coordinator of the Buccaneers, and then of the San Diego Chargers from 1979 to 1980. It's these 2 years as an offensive coordinator of the Chargers that Gibbs began to gain a reputation. Gibbs coached under offensive genius Don Coryell, who was the inventor of the innovative pass-heavy scheme that would become known as Air Coryell, which in itself was heavily influenced by the early passing offenses of Sid Gilman, but featured groundbreaking strategies for the time period with uses of receiver motions, complicated deep receiver route trees, pass-catching tight ends, and single running back formations. Gibbs took this offensive scheme and maximized it when he was given his own opportunity to be a head coach in 1981 by the Washington Redskins. His team finished 8-8 in his first year as they got established in this new, complicated offense, but it was off to the races from there. In just his second season as head coach, Gibbs would win the Super Bowl in a strike-shortened 1982 campaign. His team would look to repeat in 1983, finishing with 14 wins and just 2 losses during the regular season, but his team would fall just short, losing to the Los Angeles Raiders in the Super Bowl. Gibbs would continue to field a high-powered offense, generating double-digit wins over the next 4 seasons, culminating in a second Super Bowl title in 1987. After 3 down years by Gibbs' standards, in which the team won 7, 10, and then 10 games again, Gibbs unleashed his best coaching performance in 1991. He would match a career-high 14 wins in the regular season and absolutely crush his opponents in every step of the playoffs, all the way to his 4th Super Bowl appearance. But Washington was no paper dragon. They saved their most disrespectful beatdown for the Buffalo Bills. Washington would take such a large lead, up by 27 points, that Gibbs actually sat most of his starters for the last 11 minutes of the Super Bowl. The absolute power move to send in his backups in the biggest game of professional football. Washington would win 27-24, and Gibbs would secure his 3rd Lombardi trophy. Just to prove Gibbs wasn't just writing talented rosters to his 3 Super Bowl rings, not to say that he didn't have very talented players, but Gibbs also became the only coach to win 3 Super Bowls with 3 different starting quarterbacks and 3 different starting running backs, just proving how dominant his offensive scheme and coaching abilities were. Gibbs would squeeze into the playoffs with a 9-7 record in 1992, winning their wildcard game, but losing in the divisional round. It would then come as a bit of a surprise when Joe Gibbs announced his retirement at the conclusion of the 1993 season. In his retirement, Gibbs would create a NASCAR racing team and have some success there, eventually winning 5 NASCAR Cup Series, 4 NASCAR Xfinity Series, and a Daytona 500 4 times, on his way to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Not a bad way to spend retirement. However, Gibbs missed coaching football and returned to the sidelines in 2004 as he got the gang back together in Washington. He wouldn't be able to pick up where he had left off from his previous stint. Gibbs would only reach the playoffs twice in his 4 years back with Washington, although, to be fair to Gibbs, those 2 playoff appearances were more than Washington had seen in the 11 years since he had been retired. Either way, Gibbs announced his retirement once and for all from NFL coaching following the 2007 season. Gibbs finished with 154 wins to only 94 losses and claimed 3 Super Bowl victories and 2 NFL Coach of the Year awards on his way to the NFL Hall of Fame. Now that we've covered just how impressive Gibbs was as a coach, let's take a look at how his disciples fared once they branched off from Joe Gibbs. Now I know I just got done talking about how Gibbs was an offensive innovator, so it might seem odd that the first member of his coaching tree that I'm going to talk about is a defensive coordinator. But it's hard to argue that Richie Petitbon isn't qualified to be on this list when he spent over a decade coaching with Gibbs. Petitbon had to have soaked in something about being a head coach during that time. Petitbon served as Gibbs' defensive coordinator from 1981 to 1992. And clearly, ownership thought Petitbon was a future star as well, as they picked him to succeed Gibbs in 1993. Unfortunately, Petitbon's success as a defensive coordinator did not translate to head coaching, and Petitbon was fired after just 1 year and a 4-12 finish. Next up is Dan Henning, who joined Gibbs' first Washington staff in 1981 as an offensive assistant. He held that position for just 2 years before the Atlanta Falcons hired Henning to be their head coach, quite the promotion for an assistant coach. However, it didn't go well, with his new team never achieving a winning record. And after 4 years in Atlanta, Henning found himself back on Gibbs' staff, this time as an offensive coordinator. And to give credit where credit's due, Henning and Gibbs were a great duo, as they won a Super Bowl in not only their first short stint together back in 1982, but now again in 1987, they won a second Super Bowl together. So, once again, after just 2 years and a Super Bowl, a team came calling to hire Henning to be their own Joe Gibbs. This time, it was the San Diego Chargers, and unfortunately, it would go just as poorly. Henning never achieved more than 6 wins in any of his 3 seasons as Chargers head coach before he was let go. Overall, Henning would finish his NFL coaching career with 38 wins and 73 losses and 1 tie. Henning would go on to have a long career as an offensive coordinator throughout the NFL and as a head coach at the collegiate level. After spending the first 6 years of his NFL career as an offensive line coach for the Lions and Oilers, Joe Bugel would join Gibbs' inaugural coaching staff in 1981 as an offensive coordinator and offensive line coach. He would later add assistant head coach to his resume and hold that position until 1989, helping lead Washington to 2 Super Bowl victories and 3 appearances in that 9-year time frame. Bugel was responsible for turning Washington's offensive line into one of the best in football, nicknamed the Hogs. You know an offensive line has to be elite if they get their own nickname. You don't see that very often. Washington featured a record-breaking offense under Bugel and Gibbs' stewardship. As a result of such success, the Phoenix Cardinals would give Bugel the opportunity to be their next head coach in 1990. Like many coordinators that branch out elsewhere, the success was just too hard to replicate. His teams finished with double-digit losses in 3 of his 4 seasons, with his best year still finishing at 7-9. Bugel would be let go following the 1993 season and returned to being an NFL offensive coordinator where he continued to thrive, specializing in the offensive line. And after just 2 seasons, the Oakland Raiders would give Bugel his second chance at being a head coach. It again didn't work out, as Bugel's Raiders only won 4 games in 1997. Bugel would settle as being an offensive line coach to end out his career, including returning to Gibbs' staff from 2004 to 2007 when Gibbs returned to Washington. He had coached 2 more seasons after Gibbs left Washington and called it a career in 2009. And while he had legendary success as an offensive line coach, Bugel's head coaching career left much to be desired, with a final overall record of 24-56. Some would argue the Joe Gibbs coaching tree ends there, and I wouldn't argue against that, but I think this next name is at least worth mentioning. Arthur Smith got his very first job in the NFL serving as a defensive quality control coach on Gibbs' staff in 2007. It was only 1 year, as one of the lowest tiers on the totem pole, and even on the wrong side of the ball than what he's known for. However, I personally believe the very first coach to hire him can be very influential. There's a lot of new information on how to run an organization that Smith got to witness for the first time, which probably leaves an impression. And even though it was on the defensive side of the ball, Smith would eventually switch over to the offensive side of the ball where Gibbs specialized. So while it is a fairly weak link, I did think it was worth mentioning Smith, who would eventually go on to become the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons from 2021 to 2023. Arthur Smith ended his time as the Falcons head coach with a 21-30 win-loss record. So, There you have it, the Joe Gibbs coaching tree. 3 branches with an optional 4th branch, all of which never sniffed a positive winning percentage as head coaches. With that being said, as assistants on Gibbs' staff, they were all able to help achieve enormous levels of success. For Gibbs himself, he truly was an offensive innovator and proved his worthiness as one of the best coaches of his generation with an impressive 3 Super Bowl trophies to his name. So while his coaching tree might be disappointing, his spot in the NFL Hall of Fame is more than deserved. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this video, I very much appreciate it. If you enjoyed this type of content, let me know by giving this video a like and leaving a comment below. If you'd be interested in staying notified of future coaching tree videos, consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.